This should be a good time. This is what we're going to be talking about tonight. I started it, just so you know. Made in the image of God. So I've been praying about for a while. What I was going to talk about tonight. And this is, honestly, it's just what the Lord put in my heart. And something that I felt like He wanted me to look into and study some more. So, we're going to get right into it. We already prayed earlier before we opened up the pizza boxes. But this is made in the image of God. So here's how we start, okay? These are some key verses in the topic of that kind of talk about being made in the image of God. And for me, in the way that I was studying it, there was kind of like two different understood definitions, and that's what we're going to be looking at for the most part tonight. The first definition, or one way to look at it, is the inherent image of God. And that's found in Genesis 1:26 through 27, Genesis 6 through 9, Genesis 5 1 through 12, and James 3:9. Actually, I'm going to be looking at some of these. I probably should have pulled them up before my time here. Can you sit down on the table right there? Genesis 1:26. This is like the key passage that talks about us being made in the image of God. This is like when it's first ever mentioned, and what like every other verse is pretty much based off of. So it says in Genesis 1:26, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.'" And then it says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female." That's Genesis 1:26-27. Next is Genesis 5. Genesis 5 says, "This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, He made him in the likeness of God." We're going to look at Genesis 5 and James 3 in a little bit. Oh, wait, sorry, Genesis 9. Let me look at Genesis 9 here. Yeah, we're going to look at those in a little bit. So those are Genesis 1:26-27, Genesis 5, 1 through 2, are kind of where it's pretty notably mentioned that we as humans, as man and woman, are made in the image of God. So that, I would say, is kind of an inherent image of God, and we're going to look at that a little bit more in depth. And what I mean by that is that everyone is made in the image of God. Every person to ever exist is made in the image of God. And then there's a second way to understand this being made in the image of God, and it's, instead of an inherent image of God, it's a developing image of God. And by that, it means like it's being made, it's happening, it's not quite there. It's not inherent where like once you're born, you're made in the image of God. A developing image of God is one that comes. And so developing image of God, also one way some verses talk about it is being made in the image of Christ. So we can look at some of those verses. Colossians 3:10. Colossians 3:10 says, "And have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator." And so already with that first verse, you could see how that idea of the image of God, the image of the creator, is not something in this case that's inherent or something that's already happened, something that's already been there, right? I'll read it again. It says, "And have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator." So it's something that is happening, right? Renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. We have Ephesians 4:24. Ephesians 4:24 says, "And to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness." So there it can kind of seem like, okay, if everyone is made in the image of God and everyone's not righteous and holy, right? How do you have that? How do those two things coexist, right? To put on a new self created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Romans 8:29. I'm going to turn there. Welcome, welcome. There's pizza if you want some. Romans 8:29 says, "For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son." So being conformed to the image of his Son means it's not happened yet, or it is something that is happening. It's something that is currently happening, but not fully yet done. It's not a past tense. It's happening. Being conformed to the image of his Son. And then I think we're going to talk about 2 Corinthians and Colossians a little bit later. So, as we can see here are the somewhat kind of two different ways to look at it, and we'll see how they're kind of connect here in a little bit. So we have the inherent image of God, which means everybody is made in the image of God. Whatever that means, whatever that includes. And then there's the I'm going to need to slow down. And then there's the developing image of God, which maybe not everyone has, and something that is currently at work for some. All right? So first we're going to look at the inherent image of God. And so here are some things that throughout multiple articles, throughout multiple studies, what people tend to agree on and what it means in being made in the image of God. And these are exclusive in that only humans, they're exclusive to humans, right? So only humans are capable of these things, right? And you have a dog, you have a monkey, you have an anteater, you have a giraffe, right? They're not capable of these kinds of things, right? So first of all is mentality, or we're mentally made in the image of God, in that we have the capability for rationality, we have the capability for reason and intellect. And some would also include in that the freedom of choice, right? For creation, they don't have a choice necessarily in what they do. It's something completely ordained by Christ, by God, and how he runs the world, right? And how he caused nature to be. And self-awareness as well. And then we're also morally made in the image of God, in that at least before the fall, we were in righteousness and we were in innocence, and that's kind of how God is. But similar to self-awareness, we have consciousness.
And this is true for everyone in general.
Yeah. Well, maybe not righteousness and innocence, but like before the fall or whatever. Yeah. Consciousness and grace and love, right? And so the whole fact that we're capable of grace, the whole of extending grace, of that we're able to love in the way that we love, and consciousness, right? And so in this is that like you have a self-conscious, you have a moral compass, you have a kind of general understanding of what's right and wrong. And animals, it's exclusive to people, it's exclusive to humans. Animals don't have that capability as much as humans do. Socially as well is something that I would say is like really within the nature of God, that he's given to us, and that we're capable of having relationships and we're capable of having fellowship. And that's something that we find, I would say, pretty beautifully, pretty strongly in the Trinity, right? And the whole idea that God is one, but he's three persons, right? And so he's never necessarily been alone, right? And there's a unity in that, and there's a fellowship, there's a relationship in the whole idea of the Trinity. And that's something that he's extended to, and us being made in his image, he's extended to us as humans. And also there's the idea that it's never good when we're alone, right? Christ never wanted us to be alone. And then some articles also, some authors also included like emotions, that we're capable of emotions, that the whole fact that we do work, you know. I mean, animals kind of work, I guess, you know. Anyway, but some included that. So here are the verses that I was going to talk about that are included in this idea of the inherent image of God. And this is something I've coined myself. I hadn't really seen any other authors talk about this idea of there being an inherent image or developing image. But this is really cool, really powerful to me. In Genesis 9:6, it says, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image." And this is really powerful to me because it's a testament to God's sense of righteousness, right? One good example that I think about is whenever the Pharaoh, and God would harden the heart of Pharaoh, right? And some might say like that's not fair that he did that and put the Egyptians through all of this. Well, in a sense, there is a sense of justice being done there, right? Where because God so much cared about the Israelites and what had happened to them and everything that they'd been through, he's essentially putting Pharaoh and the Egyptians through everything that because of how he valued and cared for the lives of the Israelites, right, and the lack of value that was also extended from the Egyptians to the Israelites. They didn't care like they should, right? And so there's a sense of righteousness and justice in that, right? Where you would be like, why would God harden the heart of anybody, right? But there's a sense of righteousness and justice in that. And what you see is that God cares for the people that are being harmed. God cares for the people that are being oppressed. And in a way, he's fighting the battle for them, at least in that sense, right? But in Genesis 9-6, you see how he cares for the individuals and how he values each and every life and how one life is not greater than another. And with whatever you've done, however evil you are, that person is made in the image of God. Right? And so if wrong is being done to you, specifically in the sense that where if you've been killed, right, however evil that person was made in the image of God. And whoever killed that person, right, is kind of talking about capital punishment, right? But that's how God values humans just because we're made in his image, right? And then James 3:9 as well. This is a New Testament verse, so obviously it's not exclusive to Old Testament, the idea of God caring for us and that we're made in his image. And here James is talking about the tongue. He says, with it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. And so, once again, he's advocating for, he's like, how are you going to talk bad to your neighbor? Or how are you going to talk bad to even maybe someone that you hate? Like, if you're going to curse anybody, it's going to be someone that you don't like, right? But he's saying, you have the tongue and you're cursing people however evil they are. They're made in the image of God. And you need to value them as such, right? This is the message that's being taught and extended through the scriptures. So this is the inherent image of God. And I'm saying it over and over again, but I just want to make it clear. And it's in the sense that each and every person has this value, right? It's not in, and we all know this, but it's not in the value of talent. It's not in the value of skill. It's not in the value of looks. It's not in the value of ownership, nationality, your age, your gender, what you can do, what you're capable of physically, like however smart you are, how much money you have, your prosperity, right? All of that. It doesn't matter. because each and every person is made in the image of God. Right. I don't know why, but it would bother me whenever people would talk about like, maybe like, yeah, I don't know why. Well, it'd be probably because it was a wrong way of looking at it. But people would be like, we're all children of God, like, and that's not. I would argue that that's not correct because you have to be born again to become a children of God, which have become a child of God. Now, what I would say is that everyone's made in the image of God, right? But not everyone is a son or daughter of God, right? So this is a little bit of a pivotal moment here, the fall. And it is for almost all of the gospel. It is, and how we look at things. I got this from one particular article, and if you wanted to, very easy to find. I'm willing to share that with you. But this, I think, is important, and this is like the in-between of the inherent image of God and the developing image of God. So first of all, the Bible teaches that even after sin, even after the fall, mankind is still created in God's image. And this is where the shift is. Sin has devastatingly affected the image of God in man. And it is only through Jesus Christ's substitutionary atonement and resurrection that mankind can be forgiven, transformed, and conformed to the image of Christ. All right. So this is actually a little bit of a mirroring of how we looked at the inherent image of God. But I want to start with this on the top right here where it says we are like a mirror. So I read this from a Desiring God article. I don't necessarily agree with everything John Piper says. I like a lot of what he says. But one thing that he talked about in that being in the image of God is that, whether it be, let's just say before the fall, right? That we were made in the hope, in the purpose of, symbolically, we're like a mirror, right? We're like a mirror that's 45 degrees facing up, right? And in that, we're looking at the Son, we're looking at the Father, we're looking at glory, right? And we're beholding Him, and then it comes down to the mirror, and we're that mirror, and as we are 45 degree angle, we're at a 45 degree angle, the reflection is being shot horizontally, straight to those around us, right? And that those next to us would experience it in that way, right? Or would be able to see that same glory that we're reflecting, right? Now, the fall would be the very opposite of that, where what would be like, I guess, negative 45 degrees. We're still 45 degrees, but the opposite way, where it's just straight to the ground, and you start to fall in love with your own reflection, kind of thing, like a whole narcissist kind of thing. I think Narcissus, I don't remember what his name was, but being narcissistic comes from that story, whatever. He falls in love with his own, and it becomes his very demise. His own reflection, it becomes his very demise. And so I guess similar to that idea, in that, like, when you're looking at the ground, it's just darkness, right? And it's just yourself, and it's ugly, especially compared to what's up there and what you could be reflecting. Okay. So looking at Colossians 3:10, it says, and have put on a new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge after the image of its creator. Ephesians 4:24 says, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Romans 8:29 says, and for those, we already looked at these, for those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. I think that whole idea of being firstborn among many brothers is really cool. So I might have gone over these verses a little bit too quickly, but here we go. In the developing image of God, okay, everyone still has that idea of being made in the image of God mentally, right? They all still have that mental capability. They all still have that moral compass. They all still have that social capability. But what happens in the fall is all of these things are marred. All of these things are twisted. All of these things are ugly. All of these things are not what they could be, right? So it makes sense whenever you consider someone who's made in the image of God who's not turned their life to Christ, right? They have the capability of rationality. They're able to reason. They have intellect. And they have choice, right? And they're self-aware, all of this. But it's not to the extent or to the degree or to the same glory that it would be having turned to Christ, right? Same with morality, right? There is a sense of what they consider to be good and evil, certain things that they love, right? When they choose to extend grace.
You have a sense of what is right and wrong.
Yeah, they have a sense of what is right and wrong. And they'll even make their own moral compass at times, whatever makes them happy, right? And they have the ability to make up their own little, this is what's acceptable, this is what's not. And then when it comes to relationships and fellowship, right? Who they choose to be friends with, who they choose to love, who they choose to be close with, who they choose to trust in, right? But in all of that is they're capable of, all of that they do, all of that they live in, but it's not to the whole aspect of when we're putting on a new self and we're being renewed in the knowledge of our Creator, right? Into the image of our Creator, or being created after the likeness of God into righteousness and holiness, right? And so what happens in our turning to Christ is that our mentality, our morality, our social lives, they shift, they change. They become more of what it was meant to be, right? And that's what a lot of these New Testament verses are talking about, is in that it's something that's being developed in us, right? We have morality, but at the same time, our morality is being renewed in Christ, right? We have social lives, but at the same time, our social lives are being created after the likeness of God. The image is developing. And this, I think, this 2 Corinthians verse, it actually happens to be one that I shared with one of the people that we were able to talk to on Saturday. And it wasn't something that I meant to happen by any means. But it definitely, like, this whole analogy of the mirror, I think it really goes well with the 2 Corinthians verse. It says, and we all, with unveiled faces, he was talking about Moses there and how he had to veil his face, but we're beholding the glory of God in an unveiled face. It's a really cool passage, but, and we all, with unveiled faces, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. I think this is really awesome because just that idea of beholding the glory of the Lord, right? I mean, you can think of that image, that symbolic image of the mirror, right? Beholding the glory of the Lord, and then that we are being transformed in that. And one thing that John Piper talks about in this analogy is that whenever that mirror is flipped from looking at the ground to the sky, or however you want to look at it, two things happen. And the two things that happen is, one, we are getting we're getting to see that glory, that glimpse of the Lord. And it's transformative to us. We're beholding that. And the second thing that happens is that we start to reflect it. And that analogy is also seen in this verse as well, where he says, beholding the glory of the Lord and are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For it comes to the Lord, or from the Lord, who is the Spirit. And this whole idea of the developing image of God, right? I think it how do I say this? We talk about like becoming Christ-like, right? Becoming like God. In Colossians 1:15, it talks about the image of God. But in this instance, he's talking about Jesus, right? And how, remember, we want to become like Jesus. In Colossians 1:15, he says he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. And so for me, this is like the apex, the peak, right? The best it can be. Like that is Jesus. He is the image of God, right? And then he says the firstborn of all creation. And to me, that speaks to two things. That firstly speaks to the idea of creation in that, well, yeah, he was the first, but we're in that creation as well, right? But he says the firstborn, and that there's others to come. Like there's others to be born. And that kind of makes me think back to here in Romans 8:29, where he says, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers, right? So in this developing image of God, everyone has that inherent capabilities that are reflective of God's character, right? Morally, mentally, socially. But it's something that has been marred. It's been twisted by the fall. And so then it becomes also in that it can be developed in us, and that when we turn to Christ, it's something that can become more of what the Lord meant for it to be, right? And that our social lives change, and that our morality changes, and that our mentality changes. And in the same way that Jesus he is the image, right? We are to become like that image, right? We are to become the image of God as well, of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation.